June 18, 2021, a Boeing 737 MAX 10 lifted off from Renton Field and landed minutes later at Boeing Field. The airplane worked. It has been flying test sorties ever since and has never carried a fare-paying passenger. Boeing had launched it at the Paris Air Show on June 19, 2017, with 361 orders and commitments from 16 customers. 9 years on, the backlog is larger and the deliveries are unchanged, still zero. So Boeing did not fail to build this aircraft. Boeing built precisely what it promised, and the promise is the reason it cannot fly you anywhere. And this is the part of the story nobody explains properly. The story does not start in 2017. It starts on December 1, 2010, when Airbus announced a re-engined A320 and called it the Neo. New engines, an existing airframe, roughly 15% better fuel burn, and no requirement for airlines to retrain their pilots from scratch. Boeing's response was to say nothing for 8 months. Inside the company, engineers had been working for years on a clean sheet replacement for the 737, a wholly new single-aisle aircraft that would finally retire an airframe first flown in 1967. That program was the right answer. It was also a decade away. Then the clock ran out. On July 20, 2011, American Airlines ordered 460 narrow-body aircraft and split the order down the middle. 260 went to Airbus. 200 went to Boeing, and Boeing only kept its half by promising a re-engined 737 it had not yet agreed to build. The board approved the program on August 30, 2011. The clean sheet was shelved, so the 737 MAX exists because Boeing lost 8 months and could not afford to lose a customer it had held for 40 years. And the argument Boeing took to airlines after that was not primarily about the engine. It was about the cockpit. A 737 pilot holds a type rating. That rating is the license to command a specific aircraft type it costs money to obtain, and it takes a pilot off the line while they obtain it. Boeing's promise was that a pilot qualified on the 737 next generation would be qualified on the MAX with a short computer-based differences course. No simulator, no downtime. An airline could mix both aircraft on the same roster and the same route on the same day. That was the product. Not the wing, not the CFM LEAP 1B. The product was that nothing about flying the aircraft would change, and Boeing put a number on it. In its 2011 contract with Southwest Airlines, the launch customer, Boeing agreed to a concession of $1 million per aircraft if regulators ultimately required simulator training for MAX crews. Southwest ordered 150 of them. $150 million, contractually pledged against a training requirement Boeing was confident would never come. Read that slowly because it is the load-bearing fact of everything that follows. Boeing did not merely prefer commonality. Boeing wrote commonality into its contracts as a financial guarantee. Putting one of these together takes weeks of research, so if this is holding your attention, hitting subscribe is the single thing that keeps the channel running. The MAX sold. By the middle of the decade, it was the fastest-selling aircraft in Boeing's history, and 3 variants were in development: the MAX 7, the MAX 8, the MAX 9. And at the top of the range, Airbus was quietly winning something Boeing had not planned to concede. The A321neo was longer, carried more passengers, and flew further than anything Boeing offered in the family. Airlines discovered they could put roughly 240 seats on it and operate transcontinental routes with a single-aisle aircraft. The MAX 9 could not match it, and the orders moved. By 2016, the A321neo held a share of the upper narrow-body segment that was approaching total, so Boeing stretched the airframe one more time. June 19, 2017, at the Paris Air Show, Boeing formally launched the 737 MAX 10 and announced 361 orders and commitments from 16 customers. It was the largest 737 ever offered, 143 feet 8 inches long, configured for up to 230 passengers. It was Boeing's answer to the A321neo, and it was late by design because it could only be built once Boeing had solved a problem the stretch created. A longer fuselage rotates at a shallower angle before the tail strikes the runway. The conventional fix is longer landing gear. Longer gear does not fit in a 737 wheel well, and redesigning the wheel well means redesigning the wing box, and redesigning the wing box means a new aircraft. Boeing's engineers solved it instead with a semi-levered main landing gear. The gear extends as the aircraft rotates, lengthening itself by roughly 9.5 inches on takeoff, then compresses back into the existing bay for retraction. It is an elegant piece of engineering, and it exists for one reason: it preserves the airframe. Everything about the MAX 10 was designed to preserve the airframe. That was the whole point, and in commercial terms it worked immediately. United Airlines took the largest order. United would eventually hold 277 of them. Ryanair, which had flown nothing but 737s for 30 years, signed for 150 firm aircraft with 150 options. Alaska, Delta, Pegasus, WestJet. WestJet would later be named the launch customer. The order book for the MAX 10 kept growing year after year, and then it flew. The 737 MAX 10 lifted off from Renton Field on June 18, 2021, and landed at Boeing Field roughly 2.5 hours later. The gear worked. The aircraft handled as predicted. Boeing had expected to be delivering it the previous year, and it was now flying its first sortie 18 months behind schedule, but it was flying. 3 test aircraft entered the program. They were known as 1G001, 1G002, and 1G003. Boeing planned certification for 2023. But notice what had quietly changed while the MAX 10 was being built. On October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 crashed into the Java Sea 13 minutes after departing Jakarta. 189 people were killed. On March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed 6 minutes after departing Addis Ababa. 157 people were killed. Both aircraft were 737 MAX 8s. Within days, the type was grounded worldwide, and it stayed grounded for 20 months. The investigations converged on a system called MCAS, and this is where the story turns back on itself, so read that slowly. The LEAP 1B is a physically larger engine than the one it replaced. To fit it under a wing designed in the 1960s, Boeing mounted it further forward and higher on the pylon. That changed how the aircraft behaved at high angles of attack. It pitched up slightly more than a 737 next generation would. Slightly, not dangerously, but differently. And a difference in handling characteristics is precisely the thing that costs an airline a common type rating. So Boeing wrote software to erase it. MCAS existed to push the nose down in a narrow corner of the flight envelope so that the MAX would feel, to a pilot, exactly like the aircraft it replaced. It took its input from a single angle of attack sensor. There were 2 fitted. In both accidents, that sensor was feeding false data, and the pilots had not been told the system existed. So the system implicated in 346 deaths was not an efficiency measure or a cost saving. It was a commonality measure. It was there to protect the promise Boeing had made to Southwest in 2011. Boeing paid for it. Congress then changed the rules. On December 27, 2020, the Aircraft Certification, Safety, and Accountability Act was signed into law. Among its provisions was a requirement that any transport aircraft newly certified after December 27, 2022, must be fitted with a modern flight crew alerting system, the kind that gives pilots a prioritized, plain language list of what is wrong and in what order. The MAX does not have one. It has the alerting architecture of a 737, which means lights, horns, and a mechanical stick shaker distributed around the flight deck in the layout of an aircraft certified in 1967. Installing a modern crew alerting system in the MAX 10 was technically possible. It was also the one modification Boeing could not make, because the moment the flight deck changes, the differences training changes, and the moment the differences training changes, the common type rating is in question. And the common type rating was the entire commercial argument for the aircraft. The MAX 8 and the MAX 9 were already certified. They were unaffected. Both had been certified before the law existed. The MAX 7 and the MAX 10 were not. So Boeing had a deadline of December 27, 2022, and an aircraft that could not meet the requirement without ceasing to be the aircraft airlines had ordered. Through 2022, Boeing lobbied openly for relief. Dave Calhoun told reporters in the summer of that year that the company would consider canceling the MAX 10 entirely if it did not get it. Families of the crash victims lobbied against the exemption. 2 senators from Washington state, where the aircraft is built, worked to secure it. In the end, the exemption passed. It was attached to the omnibus spending bill signed at the end of December 2022, days before the deadline expired. But it was not a clean waiver. Congress attached conditions. Boeing would have to develop and retrofit crew alerting improvements across the entire MAX fleet, including the thousands of aircraft already in service, and demonstrate the fix to the FAA. The relief Boeing obtained was permission to certify the aircraft without a modern alerting system in exchange for an obligation to improve alerting on every 737 MAX ever built. So the deadline was gone. But the work was not, and that is the shape of the problem, stated plainly. Boeing did not lose 4 years because the MAX 10 was a bad aircraft. Boeing lost 4 years because the design decision that made the aircraft sellable in 2017 was the same design decision that made it uncertifiable in 2022. The airframe was never the obstacle. The airframe was the obligation. Then the airplane hit a second obstacle, and this one was mechanical. On November 22, 2023, the FAA granted type inspection authorization for the 737 MAX 10, allowing agency pilots to join the flight test campaign. Boeing was telling the market it would deliver in 2024. 6 weeks later, on January 5, 2024, a door plug departed a 737 MAX 9 over Portland at 16,000 feet. Nobody on board was killed. 4 bolts had not been installed. The FAA capped 737 production at 38 aircraft per month and put inspectors on the factory floor, and the certification effort for the MAX 10 stopped being a schedule and became a queue. Then a third problem surfaced, and it had nothing to do with either. Engineers found that the engine anti-ice system, which routes hot bleed air into the inlet, could overheat the composite nacelle during prolonged operation in dry air. The failure mode applied to the whole MAX family. Boeing withdrew a request for a safety exemption in January 2024 and committed to redesigning the system instead. That redesign had to be certified before the MAX 10 could be. So the aircraft waited. It waited through 2024 and then through 2025. 2 more years of storage, insurance, inspection, and reinspection on airframes nobody could use. And while it waited, the customers did the arithmetic. United, holding 277 of them, told investors it was building its fleet plan on the assumption the aircraft would not arrive, converted part of the order to MAX 9s, and bought Airbus A321neos. Delta ordered A321neos too. Ryanair, which had waited longest and had nowhere else to go, kept waiting. And here is the number that closes the argument. Boeing launched the MAX 10 in 2017 to take back the top of the single-aisle market from the A321neo. In the 9 years since, Airbus has delivered A321neos to airlines on 6 continents, and the variant has become the best-selling narrow-body in production. Boeing has delivered 0 MAX 10s, not a reduced number, not a delayed number. 0. Compare that with the family it belongs to. Boeing has delivered roughly 2,737 MAX aircraft since 2017. The MAX 8 and the MAX 9 have carried hundreds of millions of passengers between them. The MAX 10 shares their wing, their engines, their fuselage cross-section, and their cockpit, and it has carried none. The cost of that is not a single write-down, which is what makes it hard to see. Boeing has carried abnormal production costs on the 737 program in its quarterly filings for years, and has told shareholders that further delay to the MAX 10 could require additional charges. And unlike a canceled program, this one cannot be closed. The orders are firm. The obligation stands whether or not the aircraft ever arrives, and the aircraft are being built. Completed MAX 10 airframes have been accumulating in storage at Renton and Moses Lake, finished, fully sold, and undeliverable. Then, in July 2026, it finally ended. On July 28, 2026, the MAX 10 flew its last planned certification test flight, a sortie devoted to confirming that crews could hear the lavatory smoke detector and the cabin speakers. The campaign had taken 976 flights and more than 2,060 flight hours, plus roughly 1,040 hours on the ground. Chris Payne, the Boeing vice president running the program, called it an important step on the journey. Boeing is now targeting certification in 2026 and first deliveries in 2027. Reporting in July suggested FAA approval around October. WestJet is still listed as the launch customer 9 years after the aircraft was announced. Ryanair expects its first MAX 10 in the spring of 2027, having ordered 150 of them in 2021. 9 years after launch, 5 years after first flight, 7 years later than the delivery date Boeing originally advertised. And the strange part is what happens to the promise now. Under the terms Congress attached to the 2022 exemption, Boeing must retrofit improved crew alerting across the existing MAX fleet. The enhanced angle of attack system and the redesigned engine anti-ice system developed for the MAX 10 will be fitted to every MAX in production and retrofitted to the aircraft already flying. So the aircraft that has carried nobody has ended up rewriting the flight deck of the entire family it was built to leave untouched. Boeing was right about the thing that mattered commercially. Airlines did want commonality. Southwest wanted it enough to write it into a contract. Ryanair wanted it enough to buy nothing else for 30 years. And every operator that ordered a MAX 10 ordered it because it was a 737 and not because it was new. Boeing read that demand correctly in 2011, and it read it correctly again in 2017. The company simply built a promise it could not later amend.